Thank you, Louise. 12 minutes past 8 across the globe, World AIDS Day has been marked, and here are some numbers for you. It is 21 years since the disease was first detected among gay men in America. The UN reckons more than 40 million people are now HIV infected, the majority in sub-Saharan Africa. In southern Africa, 30 million people are infected with AIDS. The disease will have killed 3.1 million people by the end of this year. Worldwide, half those infected are now women, meaning more babies will be born infected. Eastern Europe and Central Asia, with 1.2 million cases, are the fastest growing regions. Well, Christo Greyling is an age educator for World Vision based in South Africa. He contracted the HIV virus through contaminated blood products in 1985. He's in the country for World AIDS Day, which was marked here yesterday, of course, and he's with us. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Mike.
Are we losing the battle?
Well, there's good signs. South Africa, we started to see for 2 years consecutively how the numbers in the age group of school-going kids were going down. So life skills was making an impact. The reality is what we're seeing an advanced epidemic emerging, where people that got infected 10 years ago are now starting to fall ill and leaving a lot of orphan children behind, and that's the reality we're facing now.
So that's more of a social epidemic as opposed to a medical epidemic, isn't it?
Well, still, the medical epidemic still exists. People cannot be complacent about it, but the impact of the epidemic on communities and societies is now becoming very apparent.
Did it take a while in South Africa for the message to get through?
Yeah.
Why?
I started talking about '92 about HIV. It was coming out with my status of being public, and people just didn't want to believe it. It's not going to affect them. It's happening to other people. So it was the belief that it can't happen to me that was the biggest problem.
How much of it is lack of education?
A great deal of it. Misconceptions and lack of information causes people to, on the one hand, fear. There's no treatment for the disease. There's no cure yet, so people don't want to know if they're infected. And that caused them just to go on with their lifestyles.
How much do we know of it is preventable behaviour, which is versus what happened to you, which was beyond your control?
Well, HIV and AIDS is 100% preventable, and that's the sad part about HIV and AIDS. Nobody has to get infected.
You know the difference. I mean, they made a mistake. It wasn't deliberate on your part. If you go out and start jabbing yourself with needles and sleeping with a whole bunch of women, you know, you're asking for trouble.
That's right. So that's the bad part. You can prevent it, but sadly people don't believe it can happen to them, and therefore continue with their lifestyle.
South Africa does seem a particularly bad example, though, doesn't it? I mean, yeah, in New Zealand we've got it, I think I'm right in saying, largely under control. The numbers aren't increasing, and so the message has got through. Yet in South Africa it took so long. Why?
Well, it's a difficult situation in Southern Africa due to the cultural problems, the whole thing about the roles of gender, the role that men play versus what women can do. So it's not as easy as to have a containable group of people that you can talk to. It's a bit more difficult when the epidemic has spread into the larger community, and that's not as easy targetable.
And so is that a generational change you're talking about as far as men, the way they treat women, think of women, act around women?
Yeah, it is really a change that have to take over a long period of time, and the church and the faith communities have to play a large role to be able to change that.
What about prejudice? How has that changed over the years and the time you've been working with the disease?
Well, it is still changing. Prejudice was, if you're HIV positive, then people were they didn't know how to react, what to do, and rather would not touch the subject. Now it's starting to change, and that people are starting to see HIV positive people around them, and it's touching their own families. And it's people's stories that changes these attitudes.
What was your story in the sense? I mean, how did you react when you got it or when you were told?
Well, it was in '87 that I heard there was HIV positive, and at that stage it was early days. I didn't think I'm going to survive. I didn't think I'm going to be here after so many years.
What did they tell you?
Well, they basically said you must be ready, 2 or 3 years. And so that's why at that stage I was nearly engaged to a girlfriend and didn't even think to get married. And I just said, stop it. And she said, no, but I loved you before you became HIV positive. I'm going to marry you. So we didn't expect to see our first wedding anniversary, and now it's 15 years down the line.
And why is that? Is it attitude or drugs or both?
It's both. For me, it was positive lifestyle, having lots of support, and not living to die, but living for the future. That made a difference in terms of that. But also in terms of lately drugs became available. I'm on antiretroviral since April this year. Reason for that was not so much that I needed it, but because we are starting to get 39 years old and we were starting to see the results in terms of medication that's available, and how it has lowered the chances of transmission, and that made it possible that we could think about children that we could never think about.
Which is why we have the bear.
Yeah. So due to that, we could take a medical chance of getting Liesl pregnant, and she's 16 weeks pregnant and HIV negative thanks to medication.
Well done you, isn't that incredible? And when you were you taking a risk at all when you did that?
Oh, of course, it will stay a risk, but the risk becomes 1 in a million instead of 1 in 100.
Fantastic. The hope of a cure, do you hold out hope of a cure?
We always hope for that. At this stage, the hope for a vaccine is more real than the hope for a cure. But it's still maybe 7 years off, and therefore we can't wait for that. We have to act on what we have today, and that is prevent infections.
And when you work, where you work in Africa, are the drugs the issue as far as getting medication and vaccines to the people at a cost that they can afford?
That's part of the fight. That's part of why the bear is here, is that there's such a lot of children who are orphaned at this stage because drugs are not available, and there's no vaccine available at this stage, and it must, as soon as it becomes available, be available at reasonable cost. And that is the aim of all the people working in the field.
Well, it's been great to meet you. Appreciate your time very much. Christo Greyling, World Vision, 8.